And now, a Buddy Check 13 reminder with News 13's Amy Hoyt.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to 13 Now. I'm News 13's Amy Hoyt. We're coming to you from our newsroom in downtown Panama City on Harrison Avenue. Today is the 13th, and that means it is time for your Buddy Check. And this is your reminder, ladies, to check for lumps in your breasts. And if you feel anything, you should always call your doctor. If you're over 40, be sure to get those annual mammograms. You know, every month we bring you a special guest, a breast cancer survivor, someone who is sharing their story to get the word out to others in case it happens to you, you'll know what to do. And this month, for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, we have a very special guest. I know you're going to recognize her. She is the former Good Morning America anchor. She is a best-selling author, but most importantly, she's a breast cancer survivor. Please welcome Joan Lunden. Hi, Joan.
Hi, it's great to be with you.
It's good to see you, too. Now, I know reading from excerpts from your book that you've written about breast cancer, which we'll talk about in a little while. This was 9 years ago when you found out you were positive for cancer.
It's so hard to believe that now I'm looking at this in my rear view mirror 9 years later. And I'm going to be really candid and honest so that others understand. I didn't think it would happen to me. And why? Because I really wasn't aware of any other family history of breast cancer. And so I kind of walked around feeling immune. I just figured it would happen to somebody else and not me, that I wouldn't be that 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer at some point in their life. So I was pretty shocked when I heard those words, "you have cancer." And more importantly, I just want every woman to know I had a clean 3D mammogram that day. June 5th, 2014, a clean 3D mammogram.
So how did they discover it then?
A few years before that, I had been sent to do an interview with Dr. Susan Love, who wrote the breast book and who recently passed away. And during when they were changing batteries on the cameras, she was like a real force, Susan Love. And she was like, "Miss Lunden, you do get your mammograms every year, right?" And I told her how I was always that woman that would come out and sit, and they'd always call me back in for more pictures. And that freaks you out. And I would always ask them, "Why? Did you see something bad?" And they always said the same thing. No, it's just hard to see anything at all because you have such dense breast tissue. And I didn't know that that was a thing. I had no reaction to that because I didn't know anything about breast density. Well, with that, Dr. Susan Love said, "Wait, if you have really dense breasts, then you need to also have an ultrasound because dense tissue shows up white on a mammogram and so does cancer. So that cancer can be really masked by all that dense tissue. So you go back and tell your doctor you need an ancillary test, book you for an ultrasound." And I got to tell you, Amy, if I hadn't been sent on that interview that day, I would not have known to get that ultrasound, walked across the hall. 5 minutes after a clean 3D mammogram, I heard those words that none of us ever want to hear: "You have cancer."
Oh.
And I just, I stop and I think, if I hadn't gone on that interview, I would have walked out of there that day thinking that I was, another year, another clean mammo, and that I'm fine and I work out and I eat right and it's not going to happen to me. I hear that story from so many women on my Facebook page day in and day out. Didn't think it happened to me. I didn't have a family history. I exercise, I'm healthy, I'm fit. And they get a clean mammogram and like a month or 2 months later, they feel a lump.
So your initial reaction then, you had to be in shock. You had your husband with you, correct?
Well, not right then, but they said you have to have a biopsy. And so I had him come in with me when I had the biopsy. And I remember we were sitting in the doctor's office waiting for her to come in after seeing the results. And I just knew from the moment she walked in that door, from her demeanor, that it wasn't good news. I was diagnosed with stage 2 triple negative breast cancer I also had a DCIS tumor, much smaller, but about an inch away. And I remember I went to a breast surgeon. That's where you go next. And I remember sitting across from her, and she was like studying these results. And I'm thinking, like, what she was doing is she was preparing herself to tell me that I had stage 2 triple negative. And I'll admit to you, Amy, I knew so little about breast cancer at the time. I thought, well, at least I'm negative to 3 things. I didn't realize that that meant that of the 3 normal, if you want to call them that, the 3 more diagnosed breast cancers, I didn't have any of the receptors for any of those. So I was negative to those 3 receptors, which left me in this 4th bucket of triple negative. And there were no treatments for that except for a long course of aggressive chemotherapy.
So how long after the diagnosis do you start that chemotherapy?
Well, first of all, and I want to make sure that every woman knows, this is not a time to like be like me, Miss Type A. Don't worry, I get the door myself. Meet people with you, and not your most, hyper, the oh my
Right.
God friend. Take a relative or a friend who will listen and take notes and ask questions, because at that moment it's like the doctor's talking, but you're hearing wah wah. I mean, you're kind of in shock. And these really beginning appointments are the really important ones to figure out what regimen should I go with, because I got 2 totally different opinions. They always tell you, Amy, to go for a second opinion. The problem is you get a second opinion, and sometimes it's so different. So one wanted to do standard of care, that's surgery, and then ACT, the regimen of chemo. But another one said, no, there's this new way of looking at it. It's called neoadjuvant. And we do the chemo first. And in your case, your tumor is like at 6 o'clock under the nipple. So it's back against your chest wall. You never would have felt this until it was like way too late. And so I think you should do the chemo first. We'll shrink down the tumors, maybe even eradicate them completely. Some of the people in the trial, some of those women, really had no tumor left. And even if it's not all gone, we will have then had the opportunity to see how the tumor reacted to the chemo. And then we'll do surgery. And then you won't have to have like a mastectomy. By that time, if we really shrink that down to almost nothing, it will be a much smaller operation. And that, I thought, sounded pretty good. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, my surgery was tiny compared to what it would have been had I done surgery in the beginning. But it's difficult, Amy, when you hear recommendations from 2 different doctors who are both leading doctors in their field. And then it's kind of back in your lap to decide what to do. And those are some of the scary stumbling blocks that newly diagnosed patients go through.
Now, once you take that chemotherapy, how long of a process is that?
Well, for me, we started with the chemo, and I didn't do ACT. I did T first, and we added another drug called carboplatin. And it's definitely really aggressive. Some doctors said that's too aggressive, but I knew I had an aggressive cancer. So, and some of the women in the clinical trials completely got rid of the cancer with the combination of Taxol and carboplatin. I didn't end up having a complete pathologic response, but almost. It was almost 95% gone, plus the DCIS was completely gone. So we then went ahead and did surgery, but that was the first 12 weeks of chemo. And then I still had another round, the AC round, which is kind of the gold standard. All told, I was bald for a year. However, once you get rid of triple negative, you don't have to take hormone therapy for the rest of your life. Listen to the girl with the glass half full. Sometimes I feel like I got off lucky because I didn't have to take any other medications forever. Once it's gone, and once you pass about the 5-year mark, you're pretty well, golden. Not that I couldn't get a different kind of breast cancer. My breast cancer surgeon always reminds me, don't like feel immune now all of a sudden, continue doing all your checkups.
Do you think having a positive attitude helped you get through it?
I think so, Amy. And, I've had people say to me on Facebook, a positive attitude isn't going to cure your cancer. And I always say, yes, but it's going to help you remain hopeful and remain strong emotionally, and which affects you physically. So I think that doing everything you can to maintain your mental attitude, getting out, walking. You don't feel like exercising all the time after treatments, but I did my best to do something, even if it was just stretching on a daily basis. And I'll tell you, I also really changed my diet. Um, I got a nutritionist. I sought out a nutritionist to help me, and they put me on no wheat, no sugar, no dairy, I don't think. I remember after he told me, no this, no that, I said, like, what's left? And he said, nutrient dense proteins, lots of vegetables, and a little bit of fruit. But fruit turns to sugar, and sugar increases cell division, which you don't want to do when you're trying to get rid of a tumor. But I didn't have any of those terrible digestive issues that so many people go through when they're taking really aggressive chemos. So I think it was really worth it to pay attention to everything I ate. I ate no processed foods, no sugar.
So interesting. Now, also, you mentioned earlier that there's no family history, but you have 5 daughters.
Yeah.
Do you worry about them now? Because now there is a family history.
Yeah. And, I'll be honest, maybe I did have a family history, and I should have taken that into account, that my family never really lived close to any of our relatives. And consequently, I didn't, listen to 2 aunts talking, in the kitchen during Thanksgiving preparation saying, oh, I had breast cancer. I could have had relatives that had breast cancer, and I just didn't know it. Um, but now, of course, all my daughters, and I have 3 older daughters, um, 43, 40, and 36. They've all had their first mammogram. The youngest one just had her first baseline. You can get a baseline at 35 and then start your mammograms at 40. But don't listen to any of the recommendations to not start them until you're 45 or 50. That's insanity, because I hear from women all the time in their 40s, frankly, in their 30s, that are being diagnosed with breast cancer. Who knows what it is, what we're eating, what it is that has increased the number of breast cancers. But in the meantime, if you're not at that age yet, do your self exams. And I'll admit, I didn't used to do them because, once again, I thought that I wasn't one of the people that would get it. But do those self exams. And if you have a lumpy breast, just know that doesn't mean that you have dense breast tissue. Only a mammogram will tell you that. But in the meantime, always examine your breast, because if you are familiar with what your breast normally feels like, then if all of a sudden something feels different, you'll know to get to the doctor right away.
Now, this was a little unique for you because you're in the public eye. You're known throughout the United States, around the world. At what point did you decide, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use it for good?
My dad is a doctor, cancer surgeon. Always thought I grew up to be a doctor, but I worked in a hospital right before going to college and found out real quick stitches and scalpels would not be part of my lifelong career. But I always had this passion to, I don't know, to carry on his legacy and and interestingly and thankfully, I went into news broadcasting, and I was able to, particularly on a program like Good Morning America, disseminate health information to people to help them make more well-informed health decisions, and maybe to motivate them to live healthier lifestyles. And then when I got diagnosed with breast cancer, it was like somebody just dropped a gift in my lap. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like they dropped a gift in my lap that said, go out, learn everything you can about this cancer, and take take your camera into every single appointment, share everything that you learn. And then in essence, you are carrying on your dad's legacy. And I had that epiphany within like 48 hours after being diagnosed. So I became a very vocal and ardent. I mean, when I thought about the fact that I didn't understand breast density, and I was a journalist who interviewed experts, I knew I had to go out and like stomp the nation. And I have over the last 9 years, let me tell you. And I find out that every city I go to, every group of women I get in front of, most of them don't know about breast density up until the last year or so. I mean, I don't mean to say it's the best well-kept secret, but we just weren't taught about it. And so I went to Washington, I don't even know how many times, to talk to senators to try to get a bill passed called the Mandatory Mammogram Reporting Act. And we finally did, took almost 5 years, and they passed it, which meant that the FDA had to rewrite their regulations. They didn't put a time limit on it though, so it took another few years. But that ruling has been changed, and it now says that every radiology lab must tell every woman what her breast density is. And if it's really dense, they have to be told that they need an ancillary test. It hasn't come into effect yet, but that ruling, that regulation will take effect in January of 2024.
Not that far away. It took some time, but it was worth it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, you did become famous. You had one of the most famous covers on People magazine when you lost your hair. You still look so beautiful in that picture. It was so famous. How did that make you feel? You decided to go for it.
I was very reluctant to do it, quite honestly. I mean, you feel so vulnerable when you lose your hair. And I actually shaved mine off before it fell out. That was the advice of Robin Roberts. She was the first person I called. And she said, just don't let it start falling out on your pillow or as you're serving dinner. Just you do it yourself. Don't let the cancer do it to you. But I was a little reluctant. I was worried about my children. They're in college now, but at the time, I have two sets of twins. My younger kids of my second marriage, they're 18 and 20. But at the time, they were little. They were like 8 and 10. And I was worried about them. I never wanted it to look exploitive in any way. I don't know. I mean, these are all the thoughts you have. And yet the editor-in-chief, I remember, said to me, you just got to know you could really impact a lot of people. And when I get messages like on Facebook that say, I just got diagnosed with breast cancer, but the first thing I thought of was that picture of you on the cover of People, not necessarily the picture, but the twinkle in your eye. It said to me that even though you were battling cancer, you still had hope and strength. And that made me say to myself, I'll get through this. She got through it, and I'll get through it, which is why I love the fact that you talk to survivors, because when you first get diagnosed and you're going through it, it seems so insurmountable. And it's hard to think of life past it because you're in every single week getting your blood tested and getting, more chemo or more radiation. And it's hard sometimes to think about the fact that these days, if you catch it early enough, it's better than a 95% chance that you're going to be fine afterwards. So we live in an amazing time with so many unbelievably great treatments that are coming down the pike at record speed, because not only is there so much research being done and so much funding going into it, but now most major research institutions are sharing information. And that was really the secret to bringing us to the point where we are here today. There are treatments today for triple negative that didn't exist when I was diagnosed.
Right. And it's more common now. And I didn't know until I started doing these interviews how many different kinds of breast cancer there are.
Well, I didn't realize that no two breast cancers are alike.
Right.
And I mean, now that I understand it, and I understand, boy, I'll tell you, when they started telling me about your sentinel nodes, we're going to take out sentinel nodes, I think, God, I wish I would have listened a little bit more in biology. cell division and sentinel nodes. But we're lucky that in today's world there are, and I mean, you watch TV, you see the commercials. There's more and more new, better targeted kinds of treatment out there. The secret is catching it early. I mean, I can't impress upon your audience more that early diagnosis means a better prognosis. And the only way that's going to happen is if you make sure that you do your annual mammograms and find out. If you don't know if you have dense breasts, right after this, call your radiology lab or your referring physician and ask, because it's divided into 4 things: very fatty, mostly fatty, kind of dense, and very dense. And if you're in the very dense, you need another test. You need an ultrasound. If you're in the 75% group, you'll talk with your physician about what your other risk factors may be, and they'll help you decide. But you got to get those tests. Early detection saved my life.
Tell me about your book. You wrote a book for women to read. Had I known, you put so much information in there that is so helpful.
If anybody who gets it, you'll see it's like almost day by day. And so you really, at the end, understand what it's like going through breast cancer treatment. And, and it was tough. I mean, I had 2 blood transfusions through it all because my numbers just went down so drastically. But I just felt it was so important. I kind of think, Amy, like that I kind of fell into this excitement this assignment of mine that I gave myself as soon as I got diagnosed. And I really think it's one of the most important assignments I've ever been given in my whole life, to seek out all this information. And it kind of put my career on a different trajectory, becoming an advocate. And I mean, since then I've become an advocate and gone to Washington and fought for other things in the health field. But, that was my passion. I used to hog all the health stories on Good Morning America. And when I left GMA, I've been very careful in what kinds of projects that I have chosen. And they've almost all been in the health field, because that's just kind of, there was a wonderful saying, Amy, that there are 2 important days in your life: the day you're born and the day you find out why. And I kind of feel like, I've had this amazing career as a news journalist, but the why for me is what puts me in front of a different group of people week after week. I was in Dallas last week. I'm in Kennewick, Washington next week. I mean, I'm all over the country talking about this, because I just think that when we share our stories, others learn and others can be motivated.
What's the best advice you have for someone who gets that initial diagnosis?
Take people with you. Don't go alone to those appointments. Get a second opinion. I was reticent to go get a second opinion because I was a doctor's daughter, and I'm thinking, well, would my dad have wanted me to go get a second opinion? But he would have, I'm sure, because in this world that we live in, there's so many different treatments that you need to hear from. And if you can't figure it out with 2, get a third opinion. So that is, and accept care. And admittedly, being the, type A, I can take care of myself, I can open that door myself kind of girl, I found that hard. I found it really difficult. And my family, all my husband and my older daughter said, no, we're going with you to every one of those treatments. And needless to say, I'm glad they did.
Support groups are very important. Family, close friends, It's always important.
Other women who've gone through it. Look, you're providing support really for women out there who are maybe being newly diagnosed or are worried, or that might get the encouragement to go in and get that mammogram. When people come through book lines after speeches and they say, well, I haven't gotten it, I'm afraid don't make me come to your house, because I will.
Okay, well, you can come to my house because you already know I'm a big fan prior to this. But I appreciate you joining us. I know you have a busy schedule, and you're touching so many lives by sharing this story about being a breast cancer survivor. We appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you for letting me share it with your audience, and I hope you stay well.
Thank you. Joan Lunden, everybody. And we're going to take this opportunity to remind you to check for lumps in your breast. If you notice anything, call your doctor. If you need a mammogram, do it once a year because, as Joan said, it'll save your life. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.